You're listening to There Ought to Be a Law, the Center for Auto Safety podcast with Executive Director Michael Brooks, Chief Engineer Fred Perkins, and hosted by me, Anthony Simino. For over 50 years, the Center for Auto Safety has worked to make cars safer. Howdy, guys.
Hey, good morning, gentlemen.
Hello.
And world. Good morning, world,
Hello.
too. Why not?
Hi, listeners. Hey, listener, before we even get into anything, can you do me a favor and click that subscribe button and click 5 stars or, 7 thumbs up emojis? I don't know how this stuff works. But instead, let's get right into the show. Hey, Michael, you're a man from the South Mississippi, right?
That's it.
Okay, I mean, in the past, I've made some comments. You'd say observations about Southerners, and I know as a Northerner,
It's a long-standing, thing we've got going.
Right.
Between you New Yorkers and us Southerners. Yeah.
Okay, good.
I think that's okay to say.
So, why can't Southerners drive? So, let me back up. There's an article in Consumer Affairs that talks about basically most car accidents happen in the South. And there was an interesting part in the opening paragraph. It said, according to the U.S. GSA, the General Services Administration, a car crash happens every 5 seconds on the U.S. roads. Is that true?
That certainly sounds right.
That's insane.
Oh, it's not, they're not talking about injury or death crashes. It's just a crash. So that's not outside the realm of possibility.
Wow. So from the article, which we linked to, the number one city on the list is Memphis, Tennessee. And, Jackson, Mississippi comes in at number 7. Michael, why is the South so highly rated in bad driving?
I mean, when you look at this list, it is literally, these are the top 15. I think, they are all southern cities on this list. And even when you look at the states on the list, with the exception of Montana and Wyoming, they're all southern states, not necessarily the southeast. Arizona is in there, or Texas, which isn't traditionally considered part of the southeast. I think I've seen New Mexico pop into a lot of these, but the one thing that all those places have in common that makes you think it might have something to do with it is heat. Is their relationship between high temperatures and increased accidents. I think there's some studies that tend to show that there is. I mean, when I think about, dangerous driving conditions contributing to crashes, I think immediately about northern states and snow and, icy roads and snow do increase the level of car crashes. But Memphis is an interesting one. I mean, they're not, it's not a landslide victory over Daytona Beach, Florida. I guess you can imagine that in Daytona Beach, there are a lot of speeding related crashes because everyone's trying to mimic the race car drivers that come through town every year. But Memphis had, right with a population of 600,000 or so, the metro is a little bigger, but 600,000 and the main city of Memphis, they had 207 fatal crashes in 2022 in the year in which this was studied, which was, I believe, right about the same, just a little less than New York City, which had 228 spread over, 8 million people or so there. So New York doesn't show up on the list. They have more crashes, but Memphis is a very, unlike New York, Memphis is a very large city. It's spread out over a lot of area. There are a lot of, open roads, open spaces. You're not crammed in traffic all the time there. People speed a lot. Apparently, people looking at the data, there's a very high rate of drunk driving crashes in Memphis. I don't have a good explanation. And I would love for someone to, and maybe Fred has a better idea of why we tend to see these higher number of car crashes in southern states. There's a rural urban issue here. There are a lot of crashes in rural areas where, drivers there's less enforcement. Drivers typically reach greater speeds than they can in urban environments where the traffic's affecting the speeds they could reach. But there's something to this study, I think, that needs to be, we needs to be figured out a little more than we have. We know these crashes are happening. We just don't know exactly why.
I first want to rise to the defense of Boston drivers who had a undeserved reputation for being catastrophic. So clearly the data shows that Boston is actually, and Massachusetts in general, is a fairly benign place to drive. If you look for a cause of this, I think it's got all to do with speed. I think there's a lot more highways in the South. The cities, as you pointed out, are more spread out. There's a lot more opportunities for people to drive too fast in areas where they really shouldn't be driving too fast. In Boston, you're pretty much sitting at a standstill for a lot of the time, which is kind of frustrating if you're behind the wheel, but it's good from this perspective of removing energy from likely crashes. Even when it snows, you tend to go slower when it snows. So even though it's a little bit slippery, the collisions tend to be at lower speeds, and that's always good for you. So that's my guess. Not sure what Nis would have to say about that, but that would make sense and is consistent with what we know about the consequences of speeding.
So based on what you just said, I looked at this data again, and I think it's all suspect. I think it's wrong because Massachusetts comes in at number 48. And I mean, we had a sheriff on from Massachusetts who said, yeah, we're massholes. And I asked him the question, why do you turn right when you have your left signal on? And he said, yeah, we're not good drivers. So I cannot imagine that so many people, that 47 other states are better than Massachusetts.
Well, I have no problem with that. And Anthony, where do you live again?
New York. And where are we on the list? 49. We're better than Massachusetts. All
right.
But so looking at the
Touché.
cities, though, looking at the cities, is a lot of Florida in there, and I think, maybe a lot of people in Florida shouldn't be driving cars. That's my thought.
No, there's a lot of there's a lot. I mean, it's just striking how many southern cities are listed on the there's literally the furthest north you're going to get on this list, I believe, is St. Louis. So you're talking about, there's, I don't know how, if there's, typically, I know Houston's built on a very large area. There are a lot of highways. Memphis is very similar to that, just a massive amount of spread and sprawl around the city. And Memphis, really, the metropolitan area, extends down into the number one state on this list, which is Mississippi. So that could be playing a role in it as well. But all of the, it looks like there's a companion study that was that the same group, Consumer Affairs, did last year, which Memphis was ranked as the top ranked city for the worst drivers in America. So the data is pointing at Memphis and saying, you guys need to do a better job. One of the things that you notice about Memphis is, and the number 2 city on the list of the worst drivers, which is Baton Rouge, is that there's an incredibly high rate of fatalities due to positive blood alcohol content per 100K population. If you look somewhere, some of the other folks on the list, like in Georgia or New Mexico, you're looking at about, 5 fatalities per 100K population every year. Memphis is at 8.8. Baton Rouge in Louisiana is at 10.4. And it just so happens that Mississippi is stuck right between those 2 cities. So I'm just going to go ahead and blame all of Mississippi's problems on Baton Rouge and Memphis.
Okay, said like a true Mississippian, blaming 2 cities not located in Mississippi. Great. Okay, let's move on. Normally when I think of Japanese automakers, I think, hey, they make really good cars. They're going to run forever. My nephew just bought his first car. It was a 2000 Toyota Camry in gold, because I think that's the only color they made that year. And it's probably got close to 200,000 miles on it. You figured it's going to last probably at least another 100,000, right? Because he's not driving it in Mississippi. So anyway, New York Times, Toyota Motor, Honda Motor, and other top Japanese automakers said on Monday that internal investigations found that they had mishandled vehicle testing on dozens of models over the past decade. Toyota said it had failed to gather proper data when doing pedestrian and occupant safety tests for 3 models. I gotta breathe. Including its popular Yaris Cross Sport utility vehicle. Honda and Mazda Motor said they too had identified problems related to the testing of several models. So by we discovered problems is just those tests, we didn't do them or we lied. How what how is this happening?
It looks like they are, in Japan. I'm not sure how different their certification system is from America's, whether, I don't believe they have to do type certification, but it looks like, they have to apply to the transport ministry in Japan to certify their vehicles. And, there are various, we saw this a number of years ago with the Takata scandal in Japan, where Takata was essentially falsifying data that was submitted to the Japanese regulators. And, they falsified data that was also submitted to the United States as well, to prove that their airbags were deploying properly. This scandal appears, so far at least, I haven't seen any note that these vehicles are being shipped to America. It looks like most of these are cars that are in Japan, although, if they're falsifying crash tests or other things on vehicles in Japan, maybe this goes further. We don't know yet. But there's an investigation ongoing. I believe yesterday the transport ministry, went to Toyota's headquarters and is having a look around. So I'm not sure exactly what that entails, but there's probably going to be more news on this. It might have a broader impact than we're aware of at this point. It may affect vehicles outside of Japan. Right now, it looks like Toyota and Mazda are really the two, Honda's mentioned, Suzuki's mentioned, Yamaha is mentioned. It looks like Honda was, had some incorrect reporting on the noise that their vehicles are making. There's some kind of noise certification that they have to meet, I believe, in Japan, not in America.
Is this like the US where these companies self-certify?
Yeah, that's right. I'm not totally clear on that, whether Japan exerts a little more authority over automakers than they do in America. In the United States, they just basically say, hey, we met this standard, and sign a piece of paper. And, occasionally the government will come back and say, yeah, let us see that data and make sure that you are actually doing these tests that are underlying this. I'm not sure if Japan follows a similar system, if they're a little more strict about receiving the data along with the vehicle certification applications. But it's interesting. I'm not sure exactly if there was a whistleblower or how this came to the attention of Japan. But, essentially it's resulted in Toyota and Mazda having to stop shipments on some of their vehicles in Japan for now. So we'll see how it plays out.
The article said, if I remember correctly, that there's no safety impact, which is interesting. And makes me wonder if there was a process fault in how they reported the information rather than an actual defect in the design or the test that they were conducting. So there's a lot that we don't know about this. We'll keep you informed.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's saying there's no safety impact when you see, and there's a Daihatsu issue here where they say that they rigged side collision safety tests for 88,000 small cars sold as Toyotas. And there was also in one article, it noted that Mazda, I believe, was, instead of during the test for the airbag deployment in frontal collisions, instead of, having a car hit a car and seeing how the car that was struck responds, they had a timer that set off the airbags versus forcing the vehicle to detect the collision and deploy the airbags, which is certainly a safety related issue. So I don't know if it's good to characterize this situation as not involving safety when you're talking about airbags and side collision tests.
Well, the person in the article who said the safety isn't an issue here is somebody from Fitch Ratings. I kind of take everything they say with a grain of salt because I think Fitch Ratings all said, "Hey, Lehman Brothers is fine." And
Yeah, I don't. I think you should ignore anything coming out of the financial markets about any auto manufacturer. As we know, I think I mentioned a couple of them a couple of weeks ago when talking about Tesla. Some of the people in the financial markets who support Tesla and are pushing them are absolutely, they're aliens when it comes to their knowledge of auto safety and what they're talking about generally.
so I'm gonna say it's fair to say that the person from Fitch Ratings was gaslighting us, and maybe Toyota and Mitsubishi was gaslighting their customers. So let's talk this week's Gaslight nominees. Brrr. I'm gonna kick it off, guys. Who do you think I chose? Who? Who? Anyone? Come on.
Elon,
No. Fred, what's your guess?
Well, I'm sorry, my mind drifted. Tell me again.
Gaslight Illumination. Who do you think, Mike? You're gaslighting me now. Damn it. Who do you think I nominated?
Oh, who do you think you nominated?
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
Well,
You're unpredictable that way.
It's a surprise. GM Cruise. That's right.
yeah.
GM Cruise is putting out a small fleet of drivers in Dallas, just 3 cars that they have human operators. They're not taking passengers. They're just driving around to collect mapping and road data. Down the road, Cruise will expand it to supervised driving measured against predetermined safety benchmarks that they will not elaborate on what those benchmarks are. GM Cruise. Just saying bullshit every time.
That's good. Well, I've got a nominee. Our friends at Nissan. It's my nominee for the Gaslight of the Week. And because they say, well, through their spokesperson at the Alliance for Automotive Innovation, they go through a lot of dissembling here, and they say that privacy policies are publicly available, blame the lawyers, but that's to ensure manufacturer compliance with notice obligations and the growing patchwork of state privacy laws. And then they go on to say, yes, your vehicle is generating and transmitting safety data. That's by design. No, your car isn't spying on you. However, if you listen to our friends at Mozilla, do you all use the Mozilla Firefox browser? By the way, it's my favorite go-to.
Mine as well.
But Mozilla, which is a nonprofit organization, reviewed the privacy policies of many, many auto manufacturers, and again, the AI or the Alliance for Automotive Innovation includes Nissan. But according to Mozilla, the very worst offender of privacy is Nissan. The Japanese car manufacturer admits in their privacy policy to collecting a wide range of information, including sexual activity, health diagnosis data, and genetic data, but doesn't specify how. They say they can share and sell consumers' preferences, characteristics, psychological trends, predispositions, behavior, attitudes, intelligence, abilities, and aptitudes to data brokers, law enforcement, and other third parties. So if you contrast what Nissan puts in their privacy policy with their spokesperson's statement that says, no, your car isn't spying on you, I definitely nominate this for Gaslight of the Week.
I like it. It's a good one. Nissan is watching and apparently perving on you. Michael, what's your vote?
Well, my nominee this week is the CEO of Ford Motor Company, Jim Farley, who is sounding like Elon Jr. these days. He's talking about technology that Ford is going to offer that will allow drivers to take their eyes off the road and their hands off the wheel. And what he says is somewhat illuminating. He says, we're getting really close. We can do it now pretty regularly with a prototype, but doing it in a cost-effective way is just the progress we're going to need to make. And he's saying, that Ford is basically going to be at level 3 in 2 years, allow you to go, hands free, eyes off the road. You can do a conference call. Your car becomes an office, the same stuff that we've continued to hear. Meanwhile, Ford's Blue Cruise, which is their level 2 system, is being investigated because it can't detect vehicles that are stopped in the middle of the road in front of it. We've seen 2 fatalities and 2 crashes, and that's why NHTSA is investigating that. And it's just this. Why are you? I don't understand, and this is just kind of a personal pet peeve here. Why are people? I don't understand why people think that being able to take conference calls in their car, turning their car in an office, or just being lazy and not wanting to pay attention to the road takes precedence over the safety of other drivers. And I can't foresee a situation in which I would be willing to allow my vehicle to take over that kind of control and responsibility, knowing that if the vehicle gets into a collision, I may be on the hook hook for it legally. And I just question where all of this is going. I mean, are we ultimately going to turn our cars into living rooms? And it just sounds so incredibly outrageous to think that this is going to be something that's going to be mass produced and put on the road safely by Ford in 2 years. So that's why Mr. Farley gets my nomination this week. Just more aspirational nonsense from the auto industry around automation.
I like that. Anyone who wants to be Elon Jr. Should be out of a job. I mean, bye-bye, Kyle. Remember that guy? Oh.
You know what I think the fundamental problem is with level 2 and level 3 vehicles? It's people. People have just refused to evolve fast enough to keep up with the machinery. I think the machinery is great. It's just people who are defective. We refuse to take over immediately. We refuse to take over safely. Shame on us. We should really be doing much better to support the machines.
I agree. And listeners, if you feel shamed, go to autosafety.org and click donate. Is that how that works?
I don't know how shame works as a donation mechanism, but we'll see, Anthony.
All right. So I'll talk to my wife about the things we talk here, and half the times her eyes glaze over and she won't even use the lane assist on our car or anything like that. She gets angry at me when I even do it, and I'm fully paying attention to the road. But there's one issue I've talked about on the show where she's like, oh, I notice these things on the road now. And that is the divided panel. Or no, wait, sorry. I read the wrong part. The underguard on trucks, on 18-wheelers, the underride guard. Is that how you call that? So picture this. You see an 18-wheeler. You see the cargo area. And below that, on a lot of them, you'll see basically either a full solid shield looking thing or you'll see a cage. Mm-hmm. And that is to prevent you from doing awesome things in your Corvette, like sliding underneath it, coming out the other side. Is that what it is?
That's what it is. And right now, there's, I believe they're required to have underride guards on the rear of trucks, where we've seen a lot of collisions and a lot of underride type collisions in the past. However, there is no requirement that they have side underride guards, which would prevent, if a 18-wheeler is stopped across the highway or is it jackknifed even in such a way that the side of the vehicle is exposed to vehicles, the side of the truck is exposed to vehicles that are coming down the road, they can easily slide under the side of the trailer, even if the vehicle has rear underride guards. And you'll see them. So you'll see a couple of different types of these. You'll see, welded steel bars, and there's also kind of like, I don't know if you've noticed, but like it looks like a plastic or fiberglass sheet runs the length of the vehicle. And then those can also contribute to fuel economy for these trucks as well, because they make the vehicles, the trailers slightly more aerodynamic. So they're helpful in some ways. There's a lot of resistance here from trucking groups. Obviously, they don't want to have to add, the extra weight. The more weight you add to a trailer, the less product they can load onto those vehicles, and then the cost of adding all those things. But we see a significant number of crashes, injuries, and truly debilitating injuries in this type of situation, because when you're in one of these crashes, your car is essentially diving under the vehicle, and it exposes your head, neck area to the rear of the trailer or the side of the trailer. And I've had a couple of friends who have been in crashes like that with terrible outcomes. There are a lot of families who are very, very strongly supporting the work of the committee they're talking about here, which is an advisory committee that was, I believe, required by the Infrastructure Act a couple of years ago. They appointed, members of the trucking community, members of the safety advocate community, and a lot of other folks who, police officers and some groups like that, to vote on, whether NHTSA should move forward with a rulemaking to require these, and it passed by one vote. It's still somewhat in contention. Obviously, the trucking groups went against the vote. I still haven't found a good, a good tally of who voted for what, but I'm assuming, and I'm pretty sure I'm right, that the truck groups voted against this because they're voting against the expenses they're going to have to make these trailers safer. But this is something that has been going on, the debate around this, for far too long, and a decision needs to be made soon by NHTSA and the FMCSA, and the FHWA kind of come into that as well.
I think you just made up a bunch of acronyms there, but
Federal Highway Administration, Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, they all play somewhat of a role in trucking safety. Sometimes, NHTSA has the authority to develop standards, but at the same time, I think it's the FMCSA is the one that's tasked with looking at the actual trailers when they're on the road, and conducting inspections to ensure that they have the proper equipment. So there are multiple agencies involved here.
We have a link to this in Transport Topic News. Fred, I want to ask you a question. When you drive, do you think, hey, driving's got to be fun? Is that the most important thing for you?
Usually staying alive is the most important thing for me.
Yeah.
Boring. Michael, fun or staying alive?
I have to, I consciously ignore the fun factor when I'm driving, because there's something, in me, and I think in a lot of people, where it feels fun. Getting into a car, acceleration is fun. Driving fast is fun. Winding around a curvy road is fun. And that's why people do it on racetracks for entertainment. And that's why people also do it far too often on public roads when they need to be on racetracks. But yeah, driving a vehicle is fun. And I think when you are driving on public roads, you need to actively suppress your fun button type stuff and make sure you're being safe.
See, my car has paddle shifters, which is bizarre because it's an automatic transmission.
Yeah, I've got those.
It's so stupid. So this is an article we're linking to from Jalopnik talking about electric vehicles. It starts off, after worries about charging and range anxiety, the biggest issue many car fans have with electric vehicles is that they're no fun to drive. So GM has a patent for a new type of clutch for your electric vehicle to make driving an EV more fun, I guess. So it says this new type of clutch actuation would improve the transmissions found in high-performance electric vehicles. Now, dumb question. I didn't think an electric vehicle really had a transmission.
There are some kinds of electric motors that run in a limited speed range. There are other kinds of electric motors that generate a lot of torque at low speed and can run over a very wide range. So there could be a technical reason, based on your selection of electric motor design, why you want to have a transmission. But I don't think that that's the real rationale behind this. I think that they're trying to make things funner. And by the way, I have paddle shifters too. And they come in really handy when you're descending a big hill. So take that.
Okay. And these actually might be good, because if people are more engaged, then they're more engaged with the road. And things around them. Look at that, putting a positive spin on things.
It's interesting as I go through life, I used to be the guy who was always lined up behind the slow car, and now I'm the slow car that everybody's lined up behind. Interesting how life changes your perspective.
Get out of the left lane.
Yeah. Just choose the middle lane. Just, make friends with nobody. Anyway, that's an interesting thing. And this reminds me of Lexus doing, I think it was Lexus having a fake shifting thing and fake shifting sounds inside their electric vehicle.
And that was completely fake. I mean, look, if there is a reason for it, and if it's keeping drivers somewhat engaged in the driving task, then fine. But, putting fake shifting sounds and bells and whistles onto cars that are more of a distraction than anything else is not something I don't think we'd be behind. But if there's a proven need for electric motors to shift gears and then okay, we're willing to listen to that.
Well, BMW, remember, they pipe engine noise into their electric cars so that it's got the BMW sound when people drive it. Which seems, utterly ridiculous too. But hey, it's dollars in sales.
BMW's also pipe in positive affirmations. You're a good person. You're better than everybody else there. Don't pay attention to other drivers on the road. Just do you.
You've now entered the Tao of Fred.
Fred, let's talk Tao. Because this week I'm really interested in this one because we haven't, it's however far into this show so far, and we haven't talked about. Well, we've glanced at Elon, but let's get into some Elon nonsense. A thing called GigaCasting.
GigaCasting. It's such a wonderful term. I love it. Did you ever have, Anthony, a Hot Wheels car?
Oh, yeah, man.
You're all over that, right?
Oh, yeah.
Well, do you have an idea how they were manufactured?
Hong Kong.
Do you think they took a giant block of aluminum and, cut it down and hogged out pieces until they ended up with a Hot Wheels car?
Pretty much.
Pretty much. Well, you'd be wrong.
They whittled it. They whittled it out of aluminum.
Look, I haven't been to Hong Kong. So
another candidate process. Actually, they used a process called die casting. And what die casting does is it's like injection molding, where it makes so many plastic parts, which I'm sure you're familiar with, except instead of plastic, it uses hot metal, typically aluminum, sometimes zinc, sometimes magnesium, but those are the three metals that they use. And it's great to produce Hot Wheels because Hot Wheels, they're light and fast, and nobody gets killed if a Hot Wheel goes out of control. Now, if you take that idea and expand it by a factor of, we'll say 10,000, you have GigaCasting.
I got to stop you real quick.
He doesn't like GigaCasting either. But GigaCasting, go ahead.
No, I was going to say there is danger with Hot Wheels because if you take two of them and you tape them to underneath your shoe on both feet and you try and skate with them, it doesn't. Look, not everybody made it in my house.
Yeah, I never tried that. My feet are too big, I think. But anyway, GigaCasting, it's a really, really big casting, and it replaces lots of individual parts. So from the manufacturer's perspective, it can save you a lot of money. Instead of getting 10 or 20 parts to put the back end of the car together, you just have one giant part that's made out of aluminum, and you can produce that in a matter of a few seconds once you've invested the considerable amount of money in the metal manufacturing, the smelting, the controls, the die, the casting. If you think of a pressurized aluminum casting, molten aluminum casting, that is under a couple thousand PSI when they inject aluminum into the mold. That's a pretty considerable manufacturing process. So the good side of that is that you can produce some medium resolution parts that you can bolt the rest of your car to, that replaces a lot of the front end individual components and rear end individual components. You would otherwise have to assemble either by robots or by hand. So manufacturing costs can go way down. So the downside of that is that you are trading the multiplicity of parts for a really significant quality control process you need to put in place for controlling this giant casting that now weighs hundreds of pounds. There's a number of problems with die casting. They can get holes and blisters and cracks, deformation and sinks and all the kinds of things that can happen can be detected, can be mitigated to some extent, but you need to have a really good quality control process. And so that sort of runs in the face of high volume production. But think of a Hot Wheels car that weighs 500 pounds, and that kind of gets you the idea of what the GigaCasting is all about. So another downside of this is that if you ever do break that big part, very difficult to repair. Standard parts that, standard design processes that come apart as parts, you can get the smaller parts to fix the car and replace the dents and straighten the frame or whatever it is you want to do. With these big GigaCastings, if you break them, you bought it. It's because you build the car around these, and you've really got to put a lot of money into repairing them. So this could be part, and I'm speculating here, but this could be part of the reason why some of the horrendous repair costs that we've seen lately associated with things like the Rivian cars that are getting banged up. And, we have a report that it took $40,000 to fix a fender bender on a Rivian car. It could be that they have similar manufacturing parts that are extensive and great in a one-off, but very, very difficult to repair. And again, that's speculation. I don't know enough about Rivian to know whether or not that would be the case, but I would expect that to be the case in cars like the Teslas that are now using these very, very large die cast parts, which they're calling GigaCasting. So that's the story about GigaCasting. It's, when you make metal parts for casting, there's a couple different processes you can use. You can either use the investment casting or you can use gravity-fed sand cast parts, which also can have very good surface finish. The latter process is what they use to make jet engine turbine blades, which have to be both very carefully made as well as have very specific and really demanding material characteristics. Single crystallization or single crystal fan blades are common and they are very difficult to produce. There's only a couple of companies that do that. But that's a sand cast process, which is more familiar to a lot of people. So with die casting, you have to make this giant mold. You pour into it molten metal at high pressure, and then you extract the part from the metal mold, which comes apart, and voila, there's your part. But you then have to go on into the quality control inspection if you want to have reliable production. We don't know what the quality control process is at Tesla. So there's no way for us to know whether or not this is overall a higher quality and safer product than would be produced in using a conventional manufacturing process. But that's the GigaCasting story. Giant Hot Wheels.
It sounds like a little bit of a nightmare for insurers who, when in collisions are looking at replacing the entire frame or the entire chassis of the body of the vehicle that everything's created around, versus replacing, front, side, rear panels as they do now.
Yeah, I agree. I would expect that the GigaCasting or the giant investment or die cast part would be surrounded by, in some sense, sacrificial panels that hopefully would break in a minor accident, and you could replace that. But I don't know. We'd have to look at the design more carefully to determine that. But it certainly has that potential of having exorbitant repair costs.
So I gotta point out, there's an article I just found that we'll link to from CNBC saying that last fall Tesla stopped doing gigacasting because turns out they couldn't really get it to work. But with that in mind, Fred, when did Elon Musk invent gigacasting?
When did he invent GigaCasting?
Yes.
Never.
Well, that's just not true. How far ahead of everybody was Tesla being the first company to ever do something like this?
Oh, I don't know, Anthony. I'm guessing you know that answer though.
It turns out some other car manufacturers had started doing this in the 90s. But they stopped too because, they're stuck with these giant molds. And if you ever want to change things, that was just a big waste of money. But Tesla is.
Yeah, that sounds like boat manufacture. A lot of boats are manufactured that way, so where they have giant molds that are, it's a lot of money to create new molds. Maybe that's the issue.
Engine blocks are often manufactured using die casting because you can get complex geometry and you can get reasonable dimensional tolerances, and there's some post processing that goes on. But the gigacasting tends to be much larger than the engine blocks themselves. So it's it's an expansion of scale. It's not an expansion of the basic process.
Right.
But it is commonly used for parts like engine blocks.
So this sounds like to me that's, Elon, when he invented this, he's like, hey, we do it this way. We're going to save a lot of money because we just have one piece. And then, after he invented it, he's like, oh, hey, this is a really expensive setup and it's not working that great. Let's not do this anymore. Which is kind of like everything else he's invented. He's like, hey, look at this great thing I came up with. It's not working. Let's look over here.
I think we've talked about that before. One of the problems with these new car companies that are coming out, the Rivians, the Teslas, the Fiskars, the brand new companies, is that they don't have the operational experience to really want to design for repair. The established car companies have been around a long time. They know what they have to do in order to make the cars repairable. And so, the repairability may run counter to the idea of initial manufacturing cost. It sounds like that, but I think from a consumer perspective, you really need to be attentive to the cost of repair because somebody's got to pay the bill. Things are going to happen.
Yeah, I think a lot of these car companies don't realize, hey, that's how we make all of our money, service. So safety related question to gigacasting. Okay, is there a benefit of having like a one-piece gigacasted underbody or frame or something like that compared to one that's 1,000 pieces welded together?
It all depends on your quality control processes and what's happening. So, for example, there's a list of things here that can go wrong with die casting in general and gigacasting in particular. And I'm just going to go through them really quickly. Gas porosity, drags and soldering, blisters, cracks, deformation, flow marks, cold flow, turtle cracks, sinks, short filling, flashes, inclusions, interlayers, and basically having the wrong geometry from the get-go. So there's a lot to it. And, some of these defects you're only going to find when you actually have built the dies and you've manufactured a couple of parts, because surprises happen. And then you got to rebuild the dies. So these dies would probably cost several $1 million a piece. So every time you screw up, you've got a big cost associated with fixing that screw up. And each of the parts is quite expensive. So, you've got to handle them carefully when you go through the quality control. Or you can say, well, I don't care about quality control and I'm just going to let them do what they're going to do. And, good luck to the consumer. We're not sure which approach is being taken by Tesla. I've got my guess, but I'll keep it to myself.
I don't know if you guys know this. In my spare time, I also do mind reading. And I can read Fred's mind right now. He's thinking about shampooing his dog. It's very strange. With that out of the way, hey, how about some recall time?
Strap in. Time for the recall.
Sound good?
Roundup.
Sure.
Yep.
Voice in my head.
Fabulous idea.
Let's start with Mercedes-Benz. 14,912 vehicles. This is the 2024 Benz EQE 350 4MATIC.
Yeah, don't
gonna,
start.
There's
Just
a lot of
don't
350
start.
4MATICs from 2024, 2023. Yeah. So if you've got a Mercedes-Benz EQE, any variation, go to the Center for Autosafety.org and or just autosafety.org and look up your car. Because the issue here is the contractors of the high voltage battery might open, potentially resulting in loss of propulsion without prior warning. That doesn't sound good at all.
Yeah, it's basically it looks like there's a software problem in the battery management system that these vehicles have to ensure that the battery performs properly, doesn't overheat, doesn't fail. And what the problem here is causing, I believe, is a loss of power while driving. And I think Mercedes points out they first noticed this in Denmark. So it's kind of great that Mercedes has these same models all over the world where they can get reports in. They received in November 2023 their first report for reduced drive power in the United States, and now they're recalling this it looks like they're going to reprogram the battery management system. Owners should be hearing about this before the end of July.
Exciting. Next one is a little company we were just talking about called Tesla. Oh my God, 125,227 vehicles. Oh boy. This is a whole bunch of Teslas that do not follow Federal Motor Vehicle Safety Standard number 208, subsection 7.3A1.
A1.
Wow, this is a seatbelt reminder.
That's that annoying chime that no one likes that makes people buckle their seatbelts. And one that we've been trying to move to the back seats for years now, and we're still waiting on that change to FMVSS 208. But essentially here, there's a wide range of Teslas covered here from the 2012 through the current model year, but it's not all. It's all the models produced, but for some reason, it's not all of the vehicles. It looks like they're just, certain vehicles that have a particular seatbelt reminder software logic that is not working properly. And so this looks like it's going to be an OTA update to fix it. Although it looks like they're taking, a month or so to finally get the software update to their consumers. So it will be a little while before Tesla owners see this update. And in the meantime, just buckle your seatbelts and you have nothing to worry about.
Well, it's interesting they listed as an over-the-air update because in part of the description of the defect, it says, on certain affected vehicles, an open trace in the driver's seat occupancy switch may result in a loss. That sounds more of a hardware failure.
Yeah, and I think that what they're doing is they're going around it. So they're removing dependency on the driver's seat occupancy switch, and they're relying on the driver's seatbelt buckle and ignition status to activate the seatbelt reminder signals, which is probably what you should be relying on anyway. This is, one of these areas where Tesla has this whiz-bang way of detecting driver's seat occupancy, and it's not working. Just like they have a whiz-bang way of detecting what road the vehicles are traveling on when they could just be using a map to pin it down to ensure that autopilot and full self-driving are activated in appropriate areas. So, it's more Tesla being Tesla.
Mm-hmm.
Well, but on the vein of Tesla being Tesla, we recently saw an article from Tech Times that said that the required driver monitoring system that NHTSA identified as a defect in the Tesla has been neutered, basically. Well, Tesla put some updates in place, but then they put another update in place that neutered a lot of the capabilities that NHTSA had required, according to Tech Times. And what it says is insufficient lighting, a covered camera, a driver not facing forward, and a driver who wears sunglasses or a hat that covers their eyes will all prevent the new vision-based attention monitoring function from activating. Of course, the car doesn't deactivate the car, so the car is free to drive down the road without the required driver monitoring system in place. So Tesla being Tesla.
So this really sounds like they're anti-bank robber. So I rob a bank, I get into the car, and I'm wearing my sunglasses and a hat. It's not going to work for me. This is ridiculous. Elon, fix this. Come on. Okay.
Yeah, I
end
mean,
of
it's an
nonsense.
odd one. That's an odd one because everyone, a lot of drivers wear sunglasses while they're driving. I certainly do when the sun's out. And that kind of points to a problem with remedies, recall remedies. And we've probably discussed in the past that the recall system needs to be overhauled to reflect a lot of things over the years, software updates being one of them. But another area is a fix is no longer just a fix. Back in the day, you have a brake hose that's failing. You replace the brake hose with a better designed brake hose, and the problem's fixed. In 2024, you've got a bad system that's software based. You put in a software fix, but then you put in another software patch the next month that rolls back your previous software fix. Well, have you truly received a recall remedy then? So there's some, some of these remedies that Tesla has proposed to its autopilot issues with NHTSA. We said they come out and they say, oh, well, we fixed that. And NHTSA says, well, we're not sure if you have. And then Tesla a month later is coming out with some new software patch that screws up whatever the remedy was in the first place. And so the consumers are just sitting here going, what the hell just happened? Am I safe? It's a new world for recall remedies. Not all recall remedies these days are final, and it can essentially be taken away from you at any time if there's a defective or a poorly designed software patch that you install in the future.
And Anthony, as a side note, I recommend that you solicit additional contributions to the Center for Auto Safety rather than rob a bank.
Oh, I'm not sharing the money. Come on, what are you, nuts? But yeah, Fred's right. Yeah, I'm robbing banks to support the Center for Auto Safety. And you should rob banks too to support the Center for Auto Safety. Oh, Michael, you just said something very interesting. Saying that hey, the recall comes out and then another recall replaces it. Did you actually get the recall? It feels very zen. It makes me wonder, like, what's the sound of one car crashing? That was a long walk for a lame joke. There we go. Continuing with recalls. Toyota 102,000 plus vehicles. The Toyota Tundras we're talking about, or a Lexus LX600, which I guess is Lexus's version of this.
It's a giant fat SUV that Lexus sells, not a pickup truck.
Oh, okay. Well, this is for vehicles with a specific V35A engine that contains crankshaft main bearings. Basically the main bearings break apart and mess with the engine. Is that right?
Well, they're leaving debris in the engine at some of their engine plants. Some debris remains in the engine after manufacture, and for somehow that collects debris, or there's something that happens in there over time this looks a lot to me like some of the Hyundai and Kia engine recalls, where you have this engine debris and a failure of the bearings and the pistons ultimately results in engine failure. There are some warning signs here. Your engine will knock, you'll have a rough run, or you won't be able to start the engine. But the real safety issue here is the loss of motive power, stalling in the middle of a highway or wherever you're at, and that increases the risk of a crash. It doesn't look like they've got a full plan for this. They're not sending out on a notification until the end of July on this recall, but they also note that the remedy is under investigation. So this is going to be an interim warning. So if you own a Toyota Tundra or one of the big Lexus SUVs involved here, it may be a few months before you're able to have a recall performed. You really need to pay close attention to how your engine is performing. And heck, even go to Toyota and request a loaner in the meantime and see if they're willing to give you one.
Modern engines are built with much tighter tolerances than engines used to be. This gives you more efficiency. It gives you more power, more specific power from the engine. You just extract more from it than you could with the loose tolerances. The problem is when you go to tight tolerances, smaller bits of gravel which is essentially what this is, smaller bits of debris can cause significant problems. So yeah, there's always a downside to every innovation. And so the trick for really good design is to design it so that it works well with loose tolerances. This is not the direction the automotive companies are going in, but I just wanted to throw that out there. So next time you hear somebody tout the tight tolerances in their particular vehicle, recognize that there's problems associated with that too.
Who do you hang out with that says, hey, my car's got some really tight tolerances?
I don't hang out with anybody. I'm a misanthrope. I thought we established that.
Oh, you definitely did. For those of you, unfortunately, not having the video version of this podcast and listening to audio only, you missed Michael Brooks doing this amazing thing with his hands. And he was like, he had them about, 8 inches apart and his palms facing each other and he was moving around. It was kind of like he was karate chopping the air or imitating a former president of the United States. I don't know.
No, I was trying to mimic the sound of one car crashing. I still haven't gotten there.
It still sounds like a car crash. All right, last recall. We made it. Okay, this is from Ford, the Lincoln Aviator. This is, oh my God, this is 109,283 vehicles. This is 2020 to 2024 vehicles. And for those of you playing the home game, what do you think this recall is related to? That is right. It is the rear view camera. Apparently, if you have your cell phone near the rear view camera screen will not work very well. We covered something like this last week with a different company, right?
Oh, did we? Are we going to do the same recall twice?
It is not the same recall, but it was somebody else because I think
this is the one where Ford owns Lincoln, obviously. But the best part of this one is that you can avoid this completely. By the way, if you're listening to this, just don't use your cell phone while you're in reverse. I'm not sure why anyone would be using their cell phone while in reverse because you're in a driveway or a parking lot when you're doing that, and you could just park and talk to the person and then get off your phone and continue on your way. So this one is odd because Ford, says Ford will provide guidance to customers to refrain from cellular phone usage while reversing until the remedy repair is completed, after which point it's presumably okay to keep using your phone while you're reversing. I don't understand that at all.
Well, there's a little bit of bullshit here. This didn't quite make it up to the threshold of Gaslight Award, but this is a different mechanism than we discussed last week. This is electromagnetic interference caused by the transmission of radio energy from the phone, interrupting the circuitry that's behind the rear view camera. So what's interesting about that to me is that your cell phone is more or less constantly transmitting or sporadically transmitting anyway, because that's how it pings the tower. The tower knows where you are, right? And you've all heard about people being tracked because of their towers, knowing where you are and being pinged. The way it does that is to transmit a little short message to the tower that says, "Here I am," and all the towers recognize that. So the fact that you're not using your cell phone doesn't mean that it's not radiating energy. So I don't see how this is actually a good fix for any kind of long term, but hopefully they'll put some shielding around it or fix it somehow that will really insulate it from the cell phone.
All right. And with that, that is the end of another episode of their Autobia Law. And what have we learned this week? We've learned that even the Japanese auto companies will cheat at crash tests and sort of safety considerations. We learned that Elon Musk invented things. And we learned that Fred Perkins' feet as a child were too big to strap Hot Wheels to it and try to roller skate.
That is true. And a detail, when I was in junior high, Cheryl Lorenzi used to say things like, act your age, not your shoe size. It was the same for me, so I was immune to that. 14 at 14.
That's also the name of his upcoming autobiography.
And Cheryl, send a note. I don't know what ever happened to you, Cheryl, but I hope you're doing well.
Okay. And till next week. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
For more information, visit www.autosafety.org.